Tonight, Hamas rockets launched towards Tel Aviv. The first long-range attack in months.
Hamas wants to demonstrate that they haven't been crippled.
As dozens are killed in a strike on Rafah. Managing screen time for parents.
I probably should be a little bit more mindful of my screen time.
The digital distraction that's damaging kids' development. Plus, lost and found.
Everything that was me was in that wallet.
A blast from the past appears in a seaside surprise.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. Dozens of people are dead after Israeli airstrikes hit a tent camp in Rafah, according to Gaza health officials. Rescuers rushed to find survivors just 2 days following an order from the International Court of Justice for Israel to halt its military offensive. The strike reported hours after Hamas fired a barrage of rockets, setting off air raid sirens in Tel Aviv, sending people scrambling for shelter. CTV's Jeremy Sharon reports.
A barrage of Hamas rockets fired at Tel Aviv today, many shot down by the Iron Dome. But not before sounding sirens in the Israeli city, sending many running for cover. No casualties have been reported.
Today, Hamas terrorists in Gaza fired 8 rockets at central Israel from Rafah, sending millions of Israelis to bomb shelters.
This 84-year-old woman says shrapnel came crashing through the roof of her home just north of Tel Aviv. Suddenly, there was a huge boom and smoke, fire, and dust all over the house, she says. It's the first long-range rocket attack from Gaza since January.
I think Hamas wants to demonstrate that they haven't been crippled and that they still have both weapons and the ability to use them.
Meanwhile, Israeli attacks in Rafah today killed at least 35 people, according to Palestinian health officials. The IDF claims it killed 2 senior Hamas officials. Operations have continued in Rafah against court orders and mounting political pressure. Our goal in Gaza is especially emphasized here in Rafah, said Israel's defense minister while visiting troops today. Destroy Hamas, return the hostages, and maintain freedom of operation, he says.
Now, today's attacks by Hamas, a show of resiliency that now has some questioning whether Israel's goal of fully eliminating Hamas can be achieved. Heather?
All right, Jeremy, thank you. And the war in Gaza continues to spark protests here in Canada. At the University of Toronto, organizers of a pro-Palestinian encampment met today with administrators as the two sides try to hash out a deal.
We know what the risks are. We are aware of the consequences, and we are hoping that although things do not escalate, we are willing to take the risks that may or may not come with us taking up the space.
Students were handed a trespass notice Friday and given until 8 a.m. on Monday to leave. The university now threatening legal action against those who choose to stay. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs has banned a Quebec-based sexual education group from high schools in his province over a presentation he calls clearly inappropriate. Higgs expressed his displeasure on social media, saying, "I am furious" would be a gross understatement. The group shared materials well beyond the scope of an HPV presentation. A number of concerned parents have shared with me photos and screenshots. The group that held the presentations has yet to respond to CTV. The province is currently in a separate legal battle over its controversial decision on a pronoun policy. Parents are often faced with the tough question of how much screen time is acceptable. The guidance from experts is consistent. When it comes to the youngest kids, less is best. But what about adults? CTV's Christina Tanalia on the digital impact of a child's development.
Hello. Kids and screens. Sunny days. These days, the two go hand in hand. Literally. Research on the topic is mostly consistent across North America. with the Canadian Pediatric Society recommending no screen time for children under the age of 2, with the exception of video calls with close adults. Experts caution screen time can hinder kids' language and emotional development. Children benefit more from face-to-face interaction. But when it comes to grown-ups,
I probably should be a little bit more mindful.
experts say parents need to log off just as much as their kids.
I see most of the time some parents are using the phone, the kids are running.
Sometimes running into trouble. In the last decade, researchers report that parents at the playground can spend up to 30% of their time looking at their phones while their kids are playing. And those kids were more likely to engage in risky behaviors, like jumping off moving swings, leading to injuries. In a 2020 study, close to 7 in 10 parents say they are at least sometimes distracted by their smartphones, with 17% saying this happens often.
When the parent is distracted, they're not having that engagement.
This researcher points to how damaging parental screen time can be.
This is how their language develops, their cognitive abilities develop. And it doesn't mean that you always have to be paying attention to your child every single second of the day. But you need periods of time where you're giving your child quality attention.
This uncle acknowledges he uses his phone a lot.
But when I'm around him, I try to put it down. I try to get them to put it down too.
Which is why when he takes the kids to the court, he collects their phones too. And one researcher I spoke with recommends being mindful with designated time away from your phone, storing it in a drawer, for example, or mindful meals. When everyone's at the dinner table, the phones are away. Christina Tanalia, CTV News, Toronto.
Canadians facing the high cost of living don't appear to be putting the brakes on summer travel, with some prepared to spend more money this year on vacations compared to last year. Although where they will be willing to travel will matter. CTV's Kamal Karamali explains.
Pack your bags and get ready to take off.
Going to Italy, going to France, and going to Greece.
The summer travel season is here. This couple heading to Italy to tie the knot. No issues with their guests dipping into their savings to save the date.
Everyone was super thrilled for an excuse to travel because they haven't been able to for the last 3 or 4 years.
Despite economic pressures, Deloitte's Summer Outlook shows this year more Canadians are willing to vacation. More than 3/4 of Canadians surveyed say they plan to spend the same or more on summer trips this year, while only 18% won't be traveling at all, with the average Canadian paying roughly $2,400 for their vacation this year.
People really weren't able to travel much in 2021, 22, and there's still a little bit of pent-up demand that people that really want to take that big trip while they still can.
But while travelers are willing to spend more this summer, they're also prioritizing keeping trips local. 3/4 of Canadians plan to stay in the country, with 2/3 of those planning a road trip this summer. And of those hopping on a plane, nearly half will fly within Canada. Airports across the country, including here at Pearson in Toronto, say the travel season really picks up in late June, and this year is expected to be busier than last, with more passengers per day than the Christmas holidays.
They're treating travel as the last thing they want to cut based on these surveys. That said, we've already seen with inflation all over, who knows how long that will last.
So a trip abroad for now, knowing they can always come back.
I wouldn't mind doing something domestically one time. I know out east and west are gorgeous.
To backpack in their own backyard. Kamal Karamali, CTV News, Toronto.
Nearly 700 people are feared dead following a devastating landslide in Papua New Guinea. Villagers are using shovels and sticks to search through debris spanning 200 square kilometers. Their efforts to recover bodies more than 48 hours after the disaster, hampered by difficult terrain, further landslides, and shifting ground. Donald Trump faced an unwelcoming audience this weekend at the Libertarian Party's national convention in Washington.
Now I think you should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
The crowd shouted insults and heckled the former U.S. president over his COVID-19 policies and for his role in the increasing national debt. Visibly frustrated, Trump mocked the rowdy crowd, but still asked for their votes. In the U.S., wild storms sweeping across multiple states have killed at least 15 people, including children.
We barely made it. The minute we got inside, we saw everybody, and the whole room it exploded just that fast.
Tornadoes flattened homes and leveled entire neighborhoods in Texas, while in Arkansas, towns were left in ruins. In Oklahoma, devastating winds tore down power lines, ripped trees from the ground, and obliterated buildings. The severe weather also delayed the start of the Indianapolis 500, with fans forced to evacuate the stadium due to lightning. Extreme weather patterns and record-breaking ocean temperatures has experts pointing to a potentially lethal Atlantic hurricane season. Forecasters are telling Canadians to brace for the worst. Here's CTV's Paul Hollingsworth on the ominous outlook.
Hurricane forecasters predict an above-average active hurricane season starting in June.
We're transitioning from an El Nino that tends to lower the number of storms in the Atlantic into a La Nina, which tends to cause more storms in the Atlantic.
There are already record temperatures for the Atlantic Ocean. Hurricanes draw energy from warm ocean water.
Is really lining up to be an active season in the Atlantic.
The 2024 hurricane forecast predicts 17 to 25 named storms, up from an average of 14. 8 to 13 hurricanes in the forecast is a jump from the average of 7. The forecast also calls for 4 to 7 major hurricanes. The previous average is only 3. Hurricanes making landfall are difficult to predict even during an active season, but it's also worth noting 2022 was not an active season. It was an average hurricane season, but that was the year Fiona made landfall here in the Maritimes. Hurricane Fiona caused more than $800 million in damage, leaving physical and emotional scars.
People are very concerned.
Emergency management crews are already busy prepping for the probability of future major storms.
More generators, more flood response. Our chief arborist, he works very closely with Nova Scotia Power and our Public Works Department.
Previous hurricanes brought down trees and power lines, causing massive outages.
You're just looking for trouble. So we know we're going to have a hurricane. We know we're going to have, 100-kilometer-hour winds.
The Canadian Hurricane Centre is urging people to be prepared.
We're going to have storm surge. We're going to have heavy rains. We're going to have strong winds.
If the hurricane forecast is correct, people living along the Atlantic coast should brace for nasty and dangerous weather between June and November. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
With just a few weeks left before MPs break for summer, the Liberal government is poised to put some high-priority legislation on the fast track. That includes the long-awaited framework for a national Pharmacare plan. As CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver reports, there's still concern the list of medications to be covered is too limited.
Talks are intensifying on Parliament, where the Liberals are trying to quickly pass new Pharmacare legislation that could make many diabetes drugs and contraceptives free by year's end.
Right now, only a fraction of Canadian women are eligible for prescription birth control at low or no cost through a public drug plan.
The Liberals launched the first phase of their Pharmacare plan in February, offering up $1.5 billion. So far, no deals have been made with the provinces and territories, and Quebec and Alberta want to opt out.
We're hoping it's not a photo op. We're hoping that it doesn't become just a hollow promise. But that's why I said when we were concerned about Pharmacare coming out, one, does it delay getting the rare disease drug strategy out? But two, is it going to fall to the same kinds of issues that our drug strategy has?
While many healthcare advocacy groups are on side, saying a universal Pharmacare plan will improve the health of Canadians, some who testified at committee this week said the list of medications set to be covered is too limited.
For many and underinsured individuals living with diabetes in Canada, most of the commonly prescribed medications would not be covered by the proposed plan.
Another concern brought up to MPs that the universal single-payer model could disrupt existing private drug coverage.
We fear that this could crowd out private payers, which currently cover the majority of Canadians, including 1 in 3 seniors.
The government's Pharmacare legislation has the NDP's support, so it will pass. The question now is when. Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News, Ottawa.
Coming up, Canada on high alert.
We're monitoring the situation very closely.
The increasing calls for expanded surveillance on bird flu tied to cows. Plus, the lost wallet turned accidental time capsule. Doctors concerned over the potential spread of avian flu in Canada are urging the federal government to expand surveillance. The virus has circulated widely among cattle in the United States. As CTV's Kathy Lee explains, testing has started and staying ahead of the spread is critical.
The CDC confirms a Michigan farm worker is the second person to get infected with the H5N1 virus tied to dairy cows. That person has recovered from mild symptoms and had pink eye, similar to the dairy farmer from Texas who contracted the virus in April.
That is a current working hypothesis that people in dairy farms may be exposed directly to milk rather than exposed to aerosols in the air.
Currently, there are no cases of the virus in humans and cattle in Canada.
We're monitoring the situation very closely, not just in the human population, but obviously in the bovine and broader mammalian population.
The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has confirmed that milk and milk products sold on store shelves are safe because they've been pasteurized. But the supply is being tested as part of the country's effort to expand surveillance of the avian flu. Lactating dairy cows imported from the U.S. are also being tested, and there is voluntary testing of asymptomatic cows.
We need to expand, in my opinion, to conducting serological surveillance, which means looking for antibodies that might suggest a past exposure, either in dairy workers or in cattle.
Infectious disease experts say the government should also test wastewater for H5N1. Some Canadian researchers are conducting those tests themselves.
We would not be able to say that it came from humans or cattle or any other source, but what it does tell us is that it's in the environment, and so that can then allow us to begin to take precautions to stop its spread.
While the risk of avian influenza infection to people in Canada remains low.
The concern, of course, is that if this virus has some additional mutations that make it more readily transmissible between mammals, it would be problematic.
The World Health Organization says bird flu has killed about half the nearly 900 people it has infected worldwide over the past 2 decades. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
Still ahead, changing the way we use sound. How different types of noise can help treat common conditions. The science behind sound is evolving. White noise has long been the go-to for drowning out disruptions, and now researchers are noticing a lesser-known color cousin, proving to be easier on your ears and perhaps better for your brain. CTV's Allison Bamford explains.
A common sleep tactic, thousands using the soothing sounds of static or white noise to drown out everything else.
Most of these applications and programs and devices use continuous sounds, which are helpful to mask external noises and allow people to sleep better by not being disturbed by other sounds around them.
There's actually a rainbow of sounds that can impact sleep and concentration. Green noise, brown noise, and the latest color to make waves, pink.
Sound is made up of waves, much like light. On lower wavelengths of light, we have more red frequency, and on higher wavelengths, we have more bluish and violet frequencies.
The science is new, but research suggests different colors can treat different symptoms. White noise has been used to alleviate tinnitus, a ringing in your ears, and a study out of Portland shows both white and pink noise could benefit people with ADHD.
These are what we call slow waves.
At this Northwestern University campus, more research is underway, specifically looking at the perks of pink. Pink noise frequencies mirror a person's brain waves when they are in a certain type of deep sleep. And if you hear the sound at the right time, you could see a boost in rest, relaxation, and even memory.
To do that, we give short pulses of pink noise at specific times during the slow waves.
One of a few small studies that could eventually change the way we use sound in a big way. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
After the break, a nostalgic discovery.
Super old. Before me. Come on, what are the chances?
The wallet once thought to be lost to the waves of time. We leave you tonight with a story about a find that's worth its salt. A British Columbia man reunited with an unlikely time capsule once thought to be lost to the sea. CTV's Adam Sawatsky has the story.
Nick Chowdhury will never forget that day at the pier. Things did not go according to plan.
And when I got here, I decided I'm going to hop over and walk down the breakwater.
To try fishing off those rocks instead, which proved precarious with all his gear, so Nick decided to lighten his load.
And picked what I thought was the perfect spot to put my wallet down, to go fishing and come back and grab it on my way out.
But on the way back, not only had Nick caught no fish, there was no sign of his wallet.
I had everything in there. My birth certificate, my status card, social insurance card, everything that was me was in that wallet.
And seeing as this was back in 1991, Nick couldn't just go online to replace it all.
It was like a kick in the stomach.
And Nick tried not to think about it over the next 33 years, until this 14-year-old was fishing off the same breakwater. A friend asked him to help look for something he dropped in the rocks, and Jamie Lee uncovered an old wallet instead.
And it was like crusty and super hard. I was super surprised.
Not only did it contain ID that expired in the previous century, there were old-fashioned video store cards as well.
Yeah, super old. Before me.
Come on, what are the chances?
Jamie's dad, Bill Lee, started searching for the owner online before finding a lead and sending a message, which Nick thought was a scam at first.
I don't even know if I want to be touching my phone right now.
Until he was sent a picture of his younger self smiling back at him.
I was blown away.
Well, Bill didn't waste time. He immediately drove to the nearby town where Nick was living.
I just saw it as a nice gesture that I would do for my fellow neighbor.
And reunited Nick with what's been transformed into a time machine of sorts.
Remembering how I thought and saw things.
Which is why, despite being very thankful that Jamie and Bill went to the effort to return his old things, Nick is even more grateful to be forming new friendships.
Something like this that's totally out of the blue can reconnect you to your past and build new connections to people in the community.
Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Comox.
That is our newscast for this Sunday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us here at CTV National News, thank you for watching. I'll see you again on Friday. Good night.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.